95% of domestic abuse cases involve some form of economic abuse. This form of control is designed to create financial instability, foster no doubt dependency, and ultimately restrict a person's freedom, whether the person realizes or not. Welcome to another episode of the Dead Talk podcast. I'm your host, Ripon Ray. In today's episode, we explore an issue that sits at the intersection of community, safety, and no doubt power. The subject, financial abuse, which is within the broader context of domestic abuse. So to help me unpack this critically important topic, I'm joined by three exceptional guests today. First, I have Dr. Clare Wiper, Assistant Professor in Criminology at Northumbria University and co-author of the recent report Designing Out Economic Abuse in the UK's Banking Industry, A Call for Action. And I have Helen Ghani from Christian Against Poverty, an organization offering frontline support to communities experiencing financial hardship, and many of whom are also dealing with the, no doubt, consequences of economic abuse. And finally, Sharina Ali, Advice Manager at the Limehouse Project, a minority-led grassroots charity in the East End of London, supporting marginalized communities, particularly those with insecure immigration status. So for those tuning in who wish to share your own experience or research work or professional insight, you can reach me at ripon@detorg.org. But let's begin our conversation with Dr. Clare Wiper from Northumbria University, who will provide us an overview of the issue and discuss her recent published research. So, Clare, according to Surviving Economic Abuse, 95% of domestic abuse cases involve economic abuse. For listeners who may be unfamiliar with the term, what does economic abuse actually mean in everyday life?
Economic abuse is a legally recognised and highly prevalent form of domestic abuse, and it typically involves the control of a partner or an ex-partner's money and finances, including the things that money can buy. So this can range from daily essentials like food and clothing to things like mobile phones and housing. And I guess the purpose of the abuse is to exert power and control over the victim, limiting their freedom, and creating economic dependence and instability. And to achieve this, the abusive partner will often find ways of restricting, exploiting, and sabotaging the victim's access to economic resources. So if they're restricting access to economic resources, they might be doing things like controlling the victim's income, dictating or monitoring how they spend their money, or giving them, a small allowance, but requiring them to account for every penny spent, so preventing them from living freely and independently. If it's taking place via exploitation, this can take various forms, so stealing the victim's money and refusing to contribute towards household costs such as bills and utilities and council tax. The abusive partner might insist that all loans and credit cards are put in the victim's name. They might even bill debt in the victim's name without their knowledge or consent. So in my own research about women's experiences of coerced debt, I found that some of the abusive partners would deliberately damage the victim's credit score to prevent them from leaving, because credit scores are now increasingly used to determine whether we are eligible for sort of very essential economic resources like utilities and insurance and car finance and mobile phone contracts, housing, even certain jobs. And then in terms of the economic sabotage, the abusive partner might prevent the victim from accessing things like education, transport, their visa, their passport, and vital technology such as laptops and the internet, which would allow the victim to sort of work and stay connected. And I found that this is quite common in households where women's sort of unpaid labour is being exploited too. So the victim might be forced to stay at home to cook and clean and care for the children, but is forbidden from accessing paid work. So yeah, it's essentially a form of abuse that's designed to strip away the victim's independence and to make leaving feel impossible, because how do you leave and begin the process of rebuilding your life when you have no money, no access to funds, nowhere else to go, potentially lots of debt in your name? And I think that's what's so insidious about economic abuse, because it might not directly leave physical scars, but it can impoverish victims, entrap them in relationships with abusers who are physically, emotionally, and psychologically abusive. And yeah, the research shows as well that even when victims do manage to leave, the economic abuse rarely ends when the relationship ends. So for some of the women I've spoken to in my research, it often continues, and it can even escalate through tactics like refusing to pay child maintenance, running up joint debts, using the sort of financial proceedings to continue that control. So yeah, they're often trapped in situations of poverty and deprivation for years and even decades after the abuse has ended.
You talked about deprivation and poverty, but is there a link between economic abuse and household poverty?
I think there's probably a link between economic abuse and household poverty in scenarios where the victim's income was perhaps like an integral part of the household budget, but that's been sabotaged by the abuser's actions. So, for example, the abuser might have been accumulating debts or generating additional expenses in the victim's name that leave the victim with far less disposable income. Or, perhaps they've been spending all of the money that was meant for paying bills. And then these actions might then push the whole household into poverty or housing instability. But I would say it's probably more common for economic abuse to create individual poverty for the victim and possibly their children, even if the household isn't poor overall. And that's just because economic abuse doesn't necessarily reduce the abuser's economic resources. And a lot of my research shows that in many cases, it's actually increasing their access because they have control over the bank accounts, the savings accounts. They can spend the victim's income, and they can save on childcare costs and other household expenses by forcing the victims to stay at home, and so on. So yeah, I would say for the victim, however, it almost always reduces their access to money and finances. And this includes individuals who have very high incomes. So I've spoken to some women who had very well paid jobs, yet they were still struggling to afford everyday essentials because they didn't have access to their income. It was all being controlled by their partner. And some of these women accumulated huge amounts of debt to try and evade poverty, and for themselves, for their children. They were often prevented from making repayments, which meant that creditors would no longer lend to them, and they were being hounded by bailiffs, debt collectors. It was truly terrifying. So yeah, I think in these types of situations, the household may not look poor because the abuser still has money, but the victim is still effectively impoverished within the household. And again, this can continue post-separation too. So if the victim leaves and the abuser refuses to pay child maintenance, this then might lead to household poverty in the victim's new household where the children now live.
From your research, how severe is the problem within our communities, and what emerging patterns concern you the most?
Yeah, the scale of the problem is truly staggering. So that 95% figure from Surviving Economic Abuse tells us that it's not a niche issue. It's affecting most victim survivors of domestic abuse. And when you consider that 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men will experience domestic abuse in their lifetime, we're talking about economic abuse affecting millions of people across the UK. And I think Surviving Economic Abuse just conducted a national survey that found that 1 in 7 women, which I think is the equivalent of 4.1 million women, had experienced economic abuse in the last 12 months. And that Black, Asian and racially minoritized women are over twice as likely to experience economic abuse than white women. And likewise, that disabled women are twice as likely to experience economic abuse than non-disabled women. And I think in terms of my own research, there are several patterns, emerging patterns that really concern me. So I think the first is around the increasing sophistication of digital or sort of technology facilitated economic abuse. So I think abusers are using technology in ways that we couldn't have imagined even 5 years ago. They're tracking spending through banking apps. They're using spyware to monitor financial activity. They're exploiting digital payment systems to maintain control. So yeah, the same tools that were meant to make banking more accessible are now being weaponized by abusive partners. I even spoke to one woman whose abusive partner had used her thumbprint to sign into her phone while she was sleeping, and he was able to access her online banking. He took out loans in her name. He moved money into his account. He messed around with her benefits. So yeah, these technological advancements, although great in many ways, are also quite concerning when it comes to economic abuse and coercive control. The intersection of economic abuse with the rising cost of living is really concerning too. So we're seeing that abusers are exploiting financial strain to tighten their control. So we can't afford for you to work because childcare costs too much, or they're using energy costs and food prices as a sort of justification for even more restrictive financial monitoring. So I think victims are finding it harder than ever to save the small amounts that might enable them to leave. And then, yeah, I guess there's also worrying gaps as well in terms of public and professional awareness of economic abuse. So frontline workers like GPs and teachers, housing officers, debt advisors, even the police, they often don't recognise economic abuse when they see it. So someone might present with debt problems or financial difficulty, but until we start asking the right questions, we're missing the abuse that underlies it. And I think part of the problem is probably because economic abuse rarely occurs in isolation. So it's often happening alongside other forms of physical and emotional abuse, which are more commonly recognised in our society. So yeah, I've spoken to women who have said, we didn't realise that it was economic abuse until years down the line, once I'd accessed sort of specialist support. So yeah, I definitely think there needs to be something around education and economic abuse, perhaps starting even in schools.
In terms of, let's say, financial institutions, statutory bodies, or even support services, where do they fit in when it comes to responding to it?
Yeah, they all have a crucial role to play. They need to really be working together as part of a coordinated system. So yeah, financial institutions are often on the front line. So they can see the financial patterns that might indicate abuse. So imagine how beneficial it would be if all banks and building societies and credit unions had robust policies for identifying potential economic abuse. If they were able to have sensitive conversations with affected customers, if they were able to provide safe access to banking services, make referrals to specialist organisations, even share evidence with the police with the victim's consent, to ensure that the victim's able to access support and justice. But yeah, statutory bodies as well, so police, courts, social services, they have both safeguarding responsibilities and enforcement powers. So coercive control has been a criminal offence in England and Wales since 2015. And then economic abuse was recognised as a form of coercive control in the 2021 Domestic Abuse Act. So we need the police to recognise this and to act on it. And likewise, we need the family courts to get better at considering economic abuse when they're making financial remedy and child arrangement orders, especially as abusers are often using these proceedings to continue their abuse and control. And yeah, local authorities, housing services, they need to all understand this as well. At the moment, I would say domestic abuse organisations are, perhaps at the centre of the knowledge and the understanding around this, but debt advice organisations can also play a key role too. They are often, in a position to spot the unique dynamics of economic abuse. And especially for debt advisors, because they're the only ones who are accredited to provide debt advice. So when it comes to things like coerced debt, it's very important that debt advisors are able to spot when debt is the result of abuse and not just the result of poor money management, for example. So yeah, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that the sectors can't work in silos. And if clear protocols are in place across sectors, then it also reduces the burden on the victim, because the victim shouldn't really be having to tell their story 5 times to 5 different agencies who don't talk to one another.
The report that you co-produced, designing out economic abuse in the UK's banking industry and a call for action. What was the motivation behind this research, and what purpose behind the creation of the report?
So the research was a collaboration between Northumbria University, City University, and Surviving Economic Abuse. And I guess our motivation to do the research came from recognizing that while some individual banks are definitely beginning to take economic abuse seriously, the approach across the industry remains quite inconsistent and quite patchy, and is often reactive rather than proactive. So we were hearing from women in particular about the barriers they were facing. So being unable to open or close accounts without the abusive partner being present, or struggling to separate joint finances. So it became clear to us that the banking infrastructure itself needed to be looked at, because it's that same infrastructure that abusers are exploiting and weaponizing to cause harm to the victim. So I guess the question was like, how do we shift from a system that unintentionally facilitates abuse to one that actively prevents it? So yeah, we essentially brought victim survivors of economic abuse together with banking professionals from 5 different UK banks, and they worked together to co-design interventions for preventing economic abuse, because we didn't just simply want to highlight the problem, we wanted to give the industry a sort of roadmap for change, and we wanted that roadmap to be co-created with individuals who have lived experience of economic abuse. And I guess that's why we called it Designing Out Economic Abuse, because we're talking about prevention being built into the very architecture of banking systems. So into account opening processes, into digital banking design, into like fraud detection algorithms. So yeah, we hope the report helps shift the conversation from like, how do we respond when abuse happens, to like, how do we design our systems so that they're harder for abusers to exploit and easier for victims to navigate safely.
What was some of the major findings and, let's say, recommendation for our listeners' benefit?
So yeah, the report basically outlines all of the ideas that the victim survivors and banking professionals designed together, with the sort of express aim of making it more difficult for perpetrators to exploit banking products. I must emphasize that the ideas aren't necessarily just ready to implement. We're presenting them to the industry as a call to action. So can you help us feasibility test and pilot some of these ideas so that we can build safer and more effective prevention strategies in the longer term? In terms of the key findings, there was quite a lot of emphasis on banks proactively identifying abuse instead of placing the burden on the victim to come forward. So like the ideas range from using pattern detection, pattern recognition to detect signs of abuse, to detecting signs of coercion in voice or in behaviour during banking interactions. Participants also wanted to make it easier and safer, I guess, for victims to disclose abuse to their banks without alerting the abuser. So one of the groups came up with sort of the idea for an industry-wide call for help button that wouldn't be too dissimilar from the Ask for Angela scheme in bars, which would enable victims to sort of request callbacks at safe times or to use code words to indicate when they're unsafe. And then, yeah, there was lots of practical suggestions around adding additional friction to banking journeys. So requiring additional verification for certain transactions, needing both account holders' consent for large withdrawals from joint accounts, and even sort of allowing customers to add discreet "don't lend to me" flags to their accounts to prevent coerced debt. I would say that joint products, and particularly joint mortgages, featured prominently in our discussions as well. So as it stands, there's very few protections for victims experiencing mortgage abuse. And mortgage abuse includes behaviours such as coercing a victim into taking out a mortgage, then refusing to contribute towards the repayments, or taking out secured loans against a joint mortgage without the victim's knowledge or consent, or deliberately blocking the sale of a property post separation. So yeah, our participants wanted to see more protections around this, and there was a lot of recommendations around that. And yeah, just things like wanting to see more education about economic abuse, especially when opening your first joint account. And they wanted abusers to be held accountable for their behaviour. So they wanted banks to send warning letters to abusive customers with clear escalation to either account suspension or even account closure if the abuse doesn't stop. So yeah, the report has all of these ideas within it.
Lovely, Claire. Thank you. I'm sure we'll come back to the conversation anyway. So now let me move to Helen Garney from Christians Against Poverty. I know, Helen, its situation is unique in its own way, but when it comes to working with survivors of domestic or economic abuse, what financial issues tend to come up most frequently?
There are so many organisations that really are experts in helping people who are surviving that. If you are, able to explore some, some debt-free options, then yeah, absolutely, we can help you. Most of the common forms that we see are abuse in all its form is about control. But in cases of economic abuse, what we tend to see do follow the common forms that Claire's already spoken about. With our clients, we mostly see cases of economic exploitation. And it's not just somebody that you're in a relationship with. I've known cases of carers, in-laws, children, parents, friends that you trust, having stolen, money stolen from them, or if they're living in a household with someone, they've, refused to contribute to the household. They've taken up debts in the victim survivor's name only. There was one case many years ago where a lady, the one thing she cherished most in the world was her dog, and her carer would take the dog away and take it back to their house overnight if our client wouldn't hand over her debit card. So he would control access to her dog. So it takes a lot of forms, but it's always about controlling that person. We also see a lot of cases of sabotage. So having your ability to earn or maintain an income is hindered. So you can't repay the debts that you have. You maybe can't cover your bills. It's very complex, and this never exists in isolation. There are always other factors involved. So it's really important that all the support services work in collaboration with each other to support the victim survivors there.
Do you feel that the police and other statutory agencies consistently recognize and believe victims when money and financial control are involved?
The work we do involves supporting victim survivors through their debt situation. When it comes to the when it comes to the credit industry, we know that so far 25 banks and building societies now recognise and are accepting the economic abuse evidence form, which is a really important piece of tool in our toolkit. So it means that an advisor can explain the impact of the abuse, give the company all the information they need to be able to support their customer without them having to repeat the story over and over, constantly having to relive the experience, constantly sort of like re-traumatizing themselves when all they need is support. So I think, statutory agencies, police, I'd love to have them have their voice behind the economic abuse evidence form and support that, so it becomes a really commonplace thing. For example, like, the PAV, the person at risk of violence, when you're doing a bankruptcy or a debt relief order, just make it as common as that and free and easy to access.
When someone is fleeing an abusive household, is money management the priority, or are there more immediate concerns?
Quite often, somebody might come to us or be referred to us maybe by a support worker because they are fleeing the household and going to a place of safety, and they're carrying debts with them. It's not always the right time for a victim survivor at that point to be looking at debt advice. Multi-agent support is absolutely key here. The victim survivor needs to build trust with the agencies that are offering support. They need to be able to provide space for that. So we do have an amazing enhanced support and safeguarding team. And they have experience of supporting people through this whilst they address their debt. But the first thing we do is we look at the person as a whole. Is now the best time to be dealing with your debts? Are there more pressing needs that need to be addressed first, such as safety, housing, health? And that might impact your ability to have the capacity to deal with your finances right now. Sometimes, although debt is a huge issue, and sometimes it might be the thing that makes somebody finally realise that they are a victim of coercive or financial abuse. But actually, it may be that right now is not the time to deal with that. Maybe we need to refer you to an agency that can help you with those issues. When they're resolved, when somebody's safe, healthy and supported by agencies like Limehouse Project, who are grassroots, they're in your area, and they're all over the country. When somebody's safe, healthy and supported, then they'll be better equipped to address their finances, and we can start them on their debt-free journey.
Speaking of a debt-free journey, how, when it comes to, let's say, debts that are taken under coercion, how can an organization like yours can support individuals in this situation?
If it's the right time for them to start the debt-free journey, and I know of many instances when we've said to people, now's not the time, come back in 6 months or whatever, we're going to hold a space for you because we want to help. But yeah, if it's the right time and they become a CAP client, we can offer holistic support, like food vouchers to make sure you've got food in your cupboards for you and your family if they've gone with you. Fuel vouchers, let's put some credit onto your meter, your gas and your electric. We can top up mobile phones so you can stay connected to support services. You can make job applications, benefit claims. Even keeping in touch with your kids' school requires an internet connection these days. And our local CAP workers are based in communities throughout the UK in partnership with local churches. So they're already plugged into your area. They already know where is the support in your area, who can we signpost you to if you need help that's outside our remit. So our sort of like network of local churches are in a really great position to help you wherever you find a safe place to be, because they already know what support services there are.
And when it comes to rebuilding your credit, how does that work to regain the independence?
Christians Against Poverty, we're not against credit. We know credit can be so helpful in helping people like smooth over big purchases or making improvements to your home, for example. When you're already working to repay existing debt, we can see how borrowing more money, with that very attractive and tempting moniker of credit rebuilding, we can see how that could be very attractive to you. You want to rebuild your credit so that you can maybe get a better place to live, or you can, get a working washing machine, something like that. It can be very tempting, but it is borrowing more money, sometimes at inflated rates of interest. And that's not in some people's best interests. And when you become a CAP client, we make it really clear to you that whilst you're working with us, you really should not be taking out additional debt. Even if it's called credit rebuilding, it's still debt. We understand people want to rebuild their credit file for the futures, but it's just not the right time when you're looking to clear your existing debts. As and when you go debt-free, maybe consider it, but I would still urge people to be really cautious. Check what interest rates you're going to be charged. What happens if you miss payments? What additional fees are there? What are their collections like? Go on Trustpilot, that kind of thing. Like everything else, shop around. Make sure you're getting the best interest rates you can, and don't be misled that credit building is anything other than very likely high-cost short-term lending.
And finally, Helen, when it comes to reporting fraud, is action fraud actually fit for purpose for victims, or does it function more as a data collection body?
We don't have a lot to do with action fraud, and we tend not to do the reporting on behalf of our clients. Yes, I know that they collect data, and no, they don't carry out, and they can't promise you an investigation into what's happened, but they do also have a victim support team who can give you guidance on how to move forward. So I would definitely encourage anyone with concerns to contact them. And I believe that, you're always recommended, sort of like by police, by support services, to contact Action Fraud, because they may be able to help you, give you some guidance, and the data that they will collect from you with your permission is going to be really, really helpful for them identifying trends and what is going on in your area.
Thank you, Helen. Let me move to Sharina Ali from the Limehouse Project. Sharina, to start with you, what distinguishes the communities you support compared to other organizations?
Many of our clients are non-English speaking or do not have English as the first language. They have very little or no literacy. They have very little or no literacy or numeracy skills, have very minimal digital skills. They may have access to a smartphone, but probably just for social media usage. They don't really know how to access online accounts and things like that. We have many clients who queue up in the morning just to show us maybe a universal credit message that's come in the night before, and they've been unable to access their accounts. And that's pretty much all they want from us in the morning. And many of our clients access Limehouse Project either through email, through telephone, or they just turn up at the front door. It is what we're used to. Our publicity, it's word of mouth. We've been around for 40 years. Our clients trust us. Our clients let other people know. And that's pretty much how we've built our advice system. It is very busy. From Monday to Friday, we are inundated with calls. We are inundated with inquiries. And we try and support as many people as we can.
I mean, within this context, though, how does economic abuse typically present itself among the women you work with, and what major challenges arise when trying to support them?
Interestingly, the first time a lady will, like a client, will walk through our front door is usually to do a check, like a benefit check. They want to know what they're entitled to. And it's really funny because they might have been in a relationship for a short time, but a lot of the clients have been in a relationship for a very long time. And now they started to ask questions about what they should be getting, because maybe they've heard from someone else, or they possibly are aware a bit more about financial abuse. And it's taken them quite a long time to knock on our door and say, can I get some support? That would be pretty much the first time we talk to clients, and we would do a benefit check, or we would at least sit down and say, what is it that you need support with? Many of them have had joint finances for a very long time, so they have been reliant on someone else and pretty much have been looked after. But then maybe the balance isn't there, and they think, you know what, I'm not happy with the situation I'm in. Many of them are coming to us because they maybe have started work. And that is, in our center, we do have an employment and training team. We see many women going to work for the first time, start earning for the first time. There's a shift in financial freedom. But then that financial freedom now comes at a cost in a household. What is their contribution in a household? And many times we find that partners are making our female clients pay for the majority of the bills. And their income might be low. Their income might be minimal compared to their partners, but still they are having to now contribute to large amounts. And it's not fair. And that's one of the words a lot of our clients use, that it's not fair. I don't understand what's happening. Someone please explain to me what's going on. And it's nice to sit down and break it all down for them and say, this is what we think is supposed to happen. What do you think? And then it is, I think when we speak to our clients, one of the things we really face, like one of our challenges, is that the information we provide is sometimes really hard to swallow. It is the first time many of them hear that they might be entitled to some money, you know, a physical amount that we can show them and say, this is how much you're entitled to, or this is how much you are actually getting right now. It takes them a couple of times to come and understand the situation. And then there's the challenge of raising this, going back into that household and raising what they've learned and trying to challenge what's happening.
I mean, you also deal with cases where economic abuse is directly linked with immigration status. Can you explain what that means in practice?
Many of our clients are from abroad, and they are dependents of their spouses who are possibly British citizens. They've come on visas, so spouse visas or partner visas. They've come as dependents on students or other employment visas or work visas and things like that. So they do come with the idea that they are completely reliant on someone else's either visa status or relying on someone else looking after them, because that's part of the immigration process. Is when those applications are made, the person who sponsors them takes responsibility for this individual, and they will look after them throughout the whole time until they are granted the naturalization or the indefinite leave to remain or something like that. So in situations like that, because they may not have access to the right information, it becomes a little bit easier for other partners to abuse that control. Although it could be physical and it could be emotional and things like that, the financial abuse is much bigger because they may not contribute, and therefore they are completely reliant on that person, and that person now controls the whole situation.
What additional impact does this have on the survivor?
For them, we've seen situations where clients have had to stay on visas for longer because the partners have refused to make applications for them. We've seen clients who have had very little or no money for their entire time that they've been a dependent of a spouse. We've seen clients who have not even been able to buy their children basic minimal requirements, like not even a sweet after school, which isn't a lot of money, but they just don't have that financial freedom. And many of them believe that this is the situation they have to get used to. They think this is how it's supposed to be. It is very hard for them. It becomes very exhausting, and it is a very long time. Some of the rules for immigration, especially if you're a spouse, it goes up to 5 years. So, this person can be dependent on another person for 5 years. It's a very difficult situation to be in.
Transitioning from an abusive household and then moving out, that can be overwhelming in order for you to be independent. What financial skills do survivors need to build to regain their confidence?
When we have that conversation with our clients, it's really funny because many of them already have these skills. They come from very economically challenged homes previously. So they have witnessed how to look after budgets on a very minimum income already. They are very aware of how to do all of this. But then in relationships, they are being constantly told that they can't do it, that they don't know how to do it, that if they go outside, they will get robbed, they will get mugged, they will lose their money, things like that. They are constantly told they can't. But actually, individually, a lot of our clients are perfectly capable of looking after their money and making wise money management choices. So what we try here in Limehouse Project is to make them aware of what they are entitled to. That's the first thing we do, like an income maximization, like what are they entitled to, and then we have like a list of all the expenses that a person living in Tower Hamlets or London will have to pay for, like rent, gas bills, electricity bills, council tax. And then we talk about how you can minimize a lot of these costs. These are just part of everyday conversations we have, and it's a lot of our clients will turn around and say, oh, I already do all of this, or I can do this, or how, it's not. I find that our clients are already capable of doing this. It's just they've been constantly told that they can't.
So then where does cultural understanding fit in when delivering support, and how does it shape the outcomes for survivors?
So I'm Bengali. I'm Muslim. I live in East London. We come from households that are very patriarchal. Our fathers, our uncles, our husbands pretty much took care of the finances, and if you talk to my mum right now, my mum will turn around and say to you, it was a really good system, it worked because I didn't have to go to work, your dad did everything, and they will tell you that it worked, that system worked. We know it didn't work. We know many generations of women went through financial abuse, and we've questioned this, we've brought this up again and again. We know that financial freedom wasn't there. So culturally, we have to be very aware of what these ladies already know and how much they want to change. We cannot go attacking their households. We cannot go in attacking their lifestyle. We have to be very careful of what they believe, and especially things like their religious beliefs. If the person is a devout Muslim, you cannot sit there and start talking about interest rates and things like that. You have to be very aware of what people believe. I think that's something we treasure in Limehouse Project. We're very aware of what people are coming to us with. We need to be very aware of what restrictions they have as well.
And finally, Sharina, what are the common challenges women face when leaving an abusive relationship within the communities that you serve?
I think one of the first things they face is the stigma of having to leave their home, the family, the relationships that they have. We are a very close community. There's not like everyone knows what everyone has for dinner. That's how close we are. Because the dinner, it goes in containers and everyone shares it around. So if dinner is being shared, you can very well imagine all the information is being shared, and everyone's talking about whose daughter-in-law is doing what and whose son-in-law is going where and all of those things. So it's a very close community. The stigma is very heightened. And when someone has to leave a home, they're not just leaving a home, they're not just leaving a partner, they leave entire families behind, and even then, their own family may not welcome them. So it's not just you're leaving an abusive relationship, you may not even have a safe home to go to. So there's a lot of stigma in leaving abusive relationships, and especially something like financial control, where, like I said, older generations don't recognize financial abuse. They recognize physical abuse. They might even recognize mental abuse, but they don't recognize financial abuse because they've been reliant on their partners for a long time. We know that there's a lot of cultural barriers when it comes to people leaving their homes. We know that there is very little money available for people when they want to make that move. So they don't know that a lot of them may be able to access benefits by themselves. They don't know that they can change their immigration status with the support of Home Office applications. They don't know that there are housing options for them. They just simply do not have access to information because of where they've been, the situation they've been in. So it's very important that a lot of these challenges are focused on in other areas that these ladies may have access to.
Thank you, Sharina. To help our listeners take away something practical on Debt Talk, I'd like to return to our panel members and for them to provide us with top tips on today's subject, financial abuse. So let me start with Dr. Clare Wiper.
In my research, what struck me most powerfully was hearing directly from victims and survivors about their experiences, and particularly with the banking research. These weren't just abstract policy failures. These were real people describing moments of profound vulnerability. So standing in a bank branch, having finally found the courage to leave, only to be told that they couldn't open an account without their abuser being present, or, discovering debts in their name that they knew nothing about, and then facing skepticism or bureaucratic indifference when they tried to challenge them. So I think my first top tip is around the sort of importance of including lived experience in product design. I think victim survivors of abuse aren't just here to tell stories, they're experts who must be involved in designing interventions and responses. And I think we found that it isn't always about massive investment or revolutionary technology. Sometimes it's just about asking one additional question during account opening, or having a clear escalation process for staff, or changing wording of terms and conditions. So yeah, that's one top tip, but the other one's more aimed at anyone who might be experiencing economic abuse, or anyone who might know someone who is experiencing it, perhaps a friend, a family member, a colleague. So the charity Surviving Economic Abuse has lots of information on their website about economic abuse, including the different forms it takes and how you can get support, including getting support for debt and for housing. And the information is also available in a few different languages, so Arabic, Polish, and French. So yeah, check out that website. And then there's also the financial support line for victims of domestic abuse, which is run by Money Advice Plus, and they offer sort of specialist advice to anyone experiencing domestic abuse who is in financial difficulty.
Thank you, Claire. Let me move to Helen Gailey from Christian Against Poverty.
Absolutely. Yes and amen to what Claire said. And I think my answer is pretty the same, because it's not really a tip, but I would love to see all financial organisations, whether you're corporate or charity, make sure your teams are trained in recognising and supporting financial abuse. Like, is your safeguarding team able to rise to the challenge? Now, again, surviving economic abuse, they're leading the way in the UK. So if your organisation isn't already working on getting the right support in place, reach out to them. They do training. They're really good. And just to mention as well, Scotland has got a thing called Purple Phone, which is an economic abuse helpline run by Financially Included. Women can speak to one of their advisors if they're concerned that they're at risk of becoming a victim or in debt as a result of economic abuse. amongst other things. So would love to see that rolled out across England, Wales and Northern Ireland as well.
Thank you, Helen. And finally, Shurina Ali from Limehouse Project.
I think for me, taking charge of your finances is an incredibly empowering thing. I would suggest that people access that support wherever they can, if in organizations like us or online or anywhere, like taking charge of your finances. And that's where a lot of our organizations need that support as well. We need training, we need support, and we need access to services as well. We know there's loads happening, but we also need to have access to a lot of that support as well. Sometimes it does feel like you're the only one supporting a client, because that client may not be comfortable with other organizations. They're only comfortable with you. So we also need that support as well. And we've talked about this a lot in our organization, how our clients really don't want to go anywhere else. So what does that mean for an organization which is quite small? We are very limited in our resources. How do we support that client better? So it's lots to take away today.
Well, a huge thank you to our passionate, no doubt, and knowledgeable guest for sharing your expertise and insight into this important and often hidden issue, financial abuse. So do join me on the next podcast as we explore New Year's and new financial planning. I'm Ripon Ray, your host. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care.